Well, dear James, thank you for accepting my invitation for an interview.
Pleasure.
And yeah, I was quite shy about asking for this.
Yeah.
It is basically now the second season, I guess. I did 14 of them, and I wanted to start with you after the Corona times, right?
Yeah.
And if you allow me, I will ask you a couple of questions. We will
Sure.
have a conversation in the next 15
Yes.
minutes, and I don't want to take too much of your time. So I will just put up a timer, and once the timer goes off, we'll just say thank you.
Okay.
I mean, I will say thank you, and you can kick me out of your office if you like.
Yep.
Okay, so the timer is there. Sadly, this, ticking. Okay, it stopped the noise. So maybe I can start with asking you about the postdoc experience, right? I'm your postdoc. It's been a year.
Yes.
Maybe I should understand this better. So what do you expect from a postdoc?
I suppose I expect from a postdoc as opposed to a research student, I expect more knowledge and more experience of doing research. Obviously, less experience than I have, but more experience than zero. But depending on the person's own background, there'll be strong and weak points in terms of background and so on. So I'm very happy to guide and assist, and if there are problems. But I will do less quality checking than I would do with a research student who's still having to learn how to do research. So I expect a certain amount of maturity there, but I don't expect perfection. I certainly don't expect perfection. And one other thing I probably expect is a better self-understanding. I expect a postdoc to say, yes, I can do that, or I'm really not so sure about that, or can you give me some good pointers to start? I mean, any of these are valid, except saying no all the time, of course.
So more awareness.
Yes, more awareness and more knowing what needs help, what doesn't need help, where the help's needed, and that sort of thing. Whereas a research student, especially when we start, sort of need help everywhere.
Exactly.
And I expect a postdoc not to need that much help, but also be good at asking for help. I expect it's probably another way of putting it.
I'm pretty sure I'm good at all of that. It's
No,
just asking for help all the time.
No complaints, certainly. But yes, but I do expect that a certain amount of strength and a certain amount of self-knowledge, as it were, not to blunder into something that they've got no experience with without telling me they're doing. I mean, sometimes, of course, it will be the blind leading the blind. If I knew all the answers, I wouldn't need a postdoc.
Yeah.
So we might say, well, neither of us know about this one really, so let's go into it and see what we can discover, as we're doing with comprehensive governance systems at the moment. Or I might say, as I did this morning, you've written some papers, can you start the skeleton of this one? And I'd rather assume you know how to do that. And if you find there's a bit you can't do, I expect you to ask me.
Of course.
And say, I'm not sure about this bit.
I think I handled it just fine. Like
I'm sure you did. But so I expect maturity, self-knowledge, and ask for help rather than having to discover that you've blundered and didn't know it. But I also expect every postdoc to be different.
Oh yeah, of course, I understand.
And have different strengths and weaknesses. And no, I don't mean in terms of prior knowledge and skills acquired and so on. I also expect the other dimension I expect is independence.
Yep.
In the ability to come up with their own ideas, as you've done in spades, of course, and the ability to pursue their own thinking, and the ability to say to me, well, yes, you might be right, but also there's this other point of view, and maybe we should look at this one as well, or even instead, and so on. Very much I expect independence.
I see.
Because it's another independent brain on the problem.
I see. And maybe I can ask you about your experience. So how was your postdoc experience?
Okay, my postdoc experience was interesting. So as I was finishing my PhD, well, at the end of the second year of my PhD, it was a 3-year PhD, which was the norm in Britain at the time. Then the second year, I spent 2 months working with what was then the Scratchpad group at IBM Yorktown Heights, and my own PhD on integration had made me work in all sorts of non-standard fields. I wanted polynomials over the p-adics and things like that. And I was doing an awful lot of cutting and pasting of code and changing some of the assumptions. I realized that I thought we needed a much more abstract approach to computer algebra. And that sort of meshed with the IBM guys. And so I applied for a postdoc there, which I got. So I spent a year working at IBM Research in the States as part of what then became Axiom.
Yeah.
At that point it was known as Scratchpad 2. And that was a member of the team. I was a postdoc. Dick Jenks was the main leader at the time. David Young was actually the team manager. And but it was pretty independent, but I was nevertheless working under Dick's overall direction. But I was one of the main ideas about how to make more abstract and algebraic, and I did a lot of scholarship on that area and so on. But I was definitely working in a team to a goal of their and management's approval and so on. It wasn't my goal; it was a goal I liked.
Yeah.
So it was very independent. It wasn't just a job. It was a goal I liked and approved of and wanted to see developed and so on. So that was great. It was very closely aligned, and I was working with that team. And on the whole, I enjoyed it. And they offered me to stay on. Mm-hmm. What I was missing, though, was the wider side of academia. We weren't teaching.
Yeah.
We had the odd intern,
mm-hmm.
Which was fun and so on. And also I missed perhaps slightly the broader side of academia, in that I was very much I was in the maths department of the computer science research area, which was fun.
Yeah.
But there weren't that many mathematicians other than really computational ones. Mm-hmm. There weren't any other kind of, well, there were some chemists and physicists, obviously, in the physics side. There weren't sort of arts and humanities and a broader scope of lectures, and IBM research was out in the country, so I couldn't just nip into the nearest university and get refill and so on. And I missed teaching above all. So I decided that if I could, I would go back to university, as it were.
And that really feeds well into the next thing that I wanted to ask. So you are actually coming from a family of academics. Like your
Yes.
father was this legendary mathematician who he really is. And your mom was a German scholar. So how do you think that shaped your perception towards academia and that guided
It's an interesting question.
Academia?
So I've been around academia all my life, and indeed I was actually born in University College London. So I've been around academia all my life. So it was never strange to me that, whereas many people, they go to university, particularly if they're first generation university, they wonder where on earth these lecturers come from, what planet do they come from, and so on. I was on that planet already.
Yeah. If I may
Yes.
interject, so you even mentioned one time that your mom was proofreading your father's book when you were born. So
Yes.
you're really born into mathematics, once you said.
Well, yes, in that sense, yes. But I went to a pretty academic school, and I specialised on the science side, and I really enjoyed chemistry. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed chemistry. I wanted to be a chemist.
Funny enough, same here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to be a chemist, and I was also very good at mathematics, and I was reasonably good at physics. Physics was the weakest of the three. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go to Cambridge. At this point, my father died, so there was no, very sad that was, that meant there was no conflict of interest problem, and I could apply to Cambridge. Indeed, I could apply to his college because he was no longer a fellow, and the rules for time meant that was okay, and so on. I wanted to be a chemist. Yeah. If you want to do sciences, chemistry in particular at Cambridge, you do exam papers. Cambridge have their own examinations for entrance at the time, and there will be 1/3 maths, 1/3 physics, 1/3 chemistry.
Yeah.
Alternatively, if you applied to read mathematics, you would be doing 2/3 maths, 1/6 physics, and 1/6 chemistry. Mm-hmm. And if you applied to read mathematics, you could change to science,
Ah,
but not the other way round.
I see.
It was therefore clearly better strategy to apply to read mathematics and then change to science, because then I was 5/6 in my strong points rather than 2/3.
That is true. You went
So
with the least resistance.
Yes. So I applied to read mathematics, and then, so what for calendar then would be, I did my normal end of school exams, the equivalent of Abitur or Matura, in summer of 1970. Would do my Cambridge examinations in December 1970, and assuming I got in, would go to Cambridge in September 71. And there was the summer of 70. I said my father had died, but my mother talked to one of his former students, who got me a job as a temporary scientific assistant, programmer basically, in the government laboratory of which he was deputy director, which was a computer science laboratory. It no longer exists, but it was at the time Britain's answer to things like French INRIA or the German GMD and so on. And I got a job for 2 months in that laboratory, working for the laboratory's number theorist. I really enjoyed that job. I learned quite a lot. I learned how computers, of course, this is 1970, and we had one of Britain's big 3 computers. There had been a report in the mid-1960s that said the British Academia needed 3 computers, one in London, one in Manchester, one in my lab, the lab I was working in. So I was quite privileged there, and talked to people, learned a lot and so on. And then went back to school for the period of September to December, did my Cambridge examinations, went back to the laboratory in January, got my place, and indeed quite well, at Cambridge, at Trinity College, my father's old university. Really enjoyed the working in the lab, and sort of forgot to transfer to science.
Perfect.
But not just, decide, well, actually, I'm not so sure I want to do that. And indeed, it's also possible to do maths for the first year and then transfer into science, with a bit of hard work to catch up, of course. So I went up to read mathematics and did.
The rest is history, I guess.
It was actually probably that stay at the laboratory, the Atlas laboratory. It was very good in another way, which taught me a deep lesson. So I was sitting in the office. I shared an office with the laboratory number theorist. I was in there one after. It would have been Friday. Well, from Friday, and the head of programming of there was a head of programming came in and said, "Is Nelson, my boss, in?" I said, "No, he's not in today. He teaches in Oxford on Fridays." So I had a problem I wanted to ask him. And I said, well, you tell me the problem, and if I understand it, I can ask him when I next see him. He said, okay. So I explained the problem to me. I took lots of notes and so on. And then, going home that evening, I thought to myself, out of interest, James, let's pretend this isn't a research problem you're trying to tell the boss. Let's pretend it's an exam question for a Cambridge entrance exam, which was notorious for its open-ended questions. So I did that, and looked at it on, I think it was Saturday afternoon, and did it.
Perfect.
And went in the morning and saw the head of programming and said, well, I think this is the answer. He said, did you see the boss over here? I said, no, I just decided I would do it. And that taught me a deep lesson, which is that a problem may be easier than you think. If you think a problem is difficult, it is difficult.
Oh, yeah.
And if you think, well, it might well be easy, let's see if we can do it, then it might actually be easy, and there might be a lowbrow or different solution to it. And so, head of programming was really quite pleased, and so on. I didn't think very much of it until about 18 months later, I got a bunch of off-prints of the article he'd written in our name. Those were days when journals sent you physical off-prints.
Yeah, perfect.
So the good news is that my first published paper dates back to some work I did as a schoolboy. The bad news is there's there's an enormous hole in my publication record between the first and the second. And I look like a very slow starter.
Oh no, I mean, that, you can think of it that way, but I mean, I'm pretty sure like anyone that looks at your CV, even with that gap, I mean, would understand that it was one singleton that was actually, I mean, showing a huge promise before to come, right?
It is interesting. It confuses the algorithms, let's put it that way.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
So the Scopus must be really confused that there's one article there and many years while you're actually doing your undergrad, then master's, then PhD, I guess. So it is like right before your undergrad that you did.
So 71 there, the next one I think is 79. Yes.
Wow. You see, 15 minutes goes by really fast. Sadly, we couldn't even talk about how busy you are.
Yeah.
And you got about maybe 5 or 6 emails while we were speaking.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I heard it. I don't know if the microphone picked it up. But I mean, maybe next time we can talk about like some other things.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
thank you for having this conversation.
No trouble. No trouble.
It was great.
Good.
Yeah, thanks.